I'm Shannon Bisgard, Superintendent here. Glad to have such a great audience today. When you hold line learning sessions, we pick a different topic to try to keep everybody updated and share information. You never quite know if we're going to have a huge turnout or anybody at all show up. And at 5 to 12, 10 to 12, I wasn't sure anybody would. So we had more board members than anybody else at that time. So really appreciate everybody coming today. Looking forward to the conversation and give you some information to keep you updated on our facility planning. We have 3 board members here today. I want to at least recognize them for coming as well. Barry Buchholz, Clark Weaver, Matt Rollinger, all 3 right in the little board member section there. Appreciate them showing up today. As we talk through facilities, this has been when you work and live in Linn-Mar, facilities are always part of our mindset. You're always thinking ahead, what do we need to be preparing for next? Where do we need to prepare for? What are the certain areas of the community and then which levels as well? So this is kind of the next iteration of the never-ending process of facility planning. So what I'll run through with you today is things we've kind of a little more of an expanded version of what we've talked about at the last board meeting and a couple of board meetings before that as well. And what you'll see today is not a final product, exactly what things are going to look like yet, or exactly the timeline that we're looking at with everything yet. This is still very much at the conceptual level, but helping us to set our big picture pieces in place. Then we can start to work into more of the detail stages that will have already started and will continue to pick up space over the course of the next several months. So you're going to see a lot of general things such as a block on a map or a box or a colored circle, things like that to show where we're thinking of and kind of what we're thinking of, but the specific things are not finalized yet and won't be for a little while. So the other piece I want to make sure you come away with is not just an understanding of what we are doing, but how are we paying for it. So I'll touch base on that a couple times through this process as well. Anytime you have a question, just raise your hand, holler it out. I have no problem taking questions. We have time at the end, but sometimes that's hard to remember what your question is after a while, so feel free to just bring up your question as we go if you'd prefer. So with that, we covered that already, so we're just flying right along. Before we start looking ahead, I will cover a couple of things historically to kind of give you some context of how we got to where we are right now and how those two things interchange as far as where we go next. The 2 links that are there are the exact handouts that many of you picked up as you came in. If you did not grab them, they're over there on the table. There's a facility capital improvements plan, and there is a capital projects overview. Neither of these are updated, brand new documents. These are a couple of years old at least, and that's okay. It kind of shows you where we've been. It also shows you that we are looking to add some more specific things to these documents in the near future. If you go to the website, both of those documents are linked there as well. You can access those at any time. So the capital improvement plan, I think it looks like it's 2021 was the last time we had reviewed it. As we go through this process and finalize next steps, we will go back and review that capital improvement plan, which has these big items on there, but it also has a lot of smaller items such as roof repairs that need to be done on a regular basis, parking lot, some of the smaller parking lot repair work, some mechanical things, and it also has big things like schools on there as well. So that capital improvement plan is a more all-encompassing document than the other one. The other one is more of our big projects that we're looking to keep up with over time, that ongoing maintenance and planning piece of it. So there's where we are. Go back one last step looking backwards. In 2018, thankfully our community passed a bond issue to build 2 new intermediate schools. Made for an interesting time period. We had to open them up during the, boy, I didn't expect dogs to show up today. This is even getting better and better. So the bond issue passed. We were able to build 2 new schools. That helped us tremendously to provide additional space, not just for our 5th and 6th grade students, as you know, but took our 5th graders out of our elementaries, took our 6th graders out of our middle schools, gave us a lot of extra space and flexibility that we desperately needed at the time, and set us up in a really good spot, K-8, pre-K-8 especially, for the short term and hopefully the long-term future as well. So that was a big piece of that puzzle was addressed with the bond issue a couple of years ago. Finance piece, the first part I'll talk to you about here, this kind of shows our historical trend of property taxes to pay for these type of projects. So as you see here, our line over the years leading up to the bond have been pretty consistent, 1738, 1737. That's the amount of dollars per $100,000 of your property valuation, or per $1,000 of your property valuation. And then after the bond issue, the number went up to 1801, which is what we had projected and kind of promised the community it would do. And then our commitment at the time, the board made a commitment to lower that tax rate as fast as we could realistically do that after the bond. So for the 2 years, 1801 was the rate. It dropped to 1787 this past year, and we're looking at 1736 for the rate for next school year. I believe at the time when we did the bond issue, 1766 was the rate we had targeted for next school year. So we're ahead of that pace and thankful we're able to not only honor that commitment, but actually go one step farther with it too. So as you can see, we're just at or just below where we were pre-bond issue 2018 already. So that's an important piece to clarify and remind everybody as well. So after the bond issue passed, we got the new buildings built about almost a year ago, I guess it would have been. We just put together a new facility advisory committee with a representation of wide area, but you also see a very high school focus. And that was done intentionally, knowing that the 5-6 buildings help to address our K-8 buildings. High school campus became the next priority for us to really dig into. So the committee met, gosh, I can't remember how many times, from April or May through November, I believe it was, for our last meeting as well. Came up with some recommendations. So the work of that committee was review our data, where are we, discuss our needs, talk about concepts, funding matched to it as well, and then come up with some consensus and make recommendations to the school board, which was done in December. So that committee looked at things at a very high level. Several of you were in this room were on that committee. Looked at things at more of a big picture view as far as we try to prioritize our resources and timelines as well. So the recommendations from that committee, you probably can't see all the little numbers up there. Essentially what this shows is looked at all the projects that we need to, especially on the high school footprint, the main campus area. We're running out of space in this area, so we have to make sure what decisions we make now going forward are the right ones, because we can't really undo things after this next step. Once these last few rounds of open space are gone, that's about all we have to work with there. So this group really focused on about 9 different areas we looked at, and from those 9 areas you can see some prioritization items that were in the small groups. Highest priority to be done the next 2 to 3 years. Important is up to 6 years, and 3 was given could be more of a longer term thing to keep on our radar, but don't need it immediately. So the committee worked through, for example, LRC repurposing or reconfiguration. This is the LRC if you're not familiar with that name. So repurposing and reconfiguration of this building, that was given a high priority by 5 of the groups, second priority by 1, and a third priority by none of the groups, and so on down that list. So as you look through this list, you can't see the numbers, so the natural breaking point really became these 5 items here, and then also the old softball field repurposing became the other item as a priority focus for the group. So that led to kind of a master plan summary of all the visuals we had to look at how each of those priority pieces fit into the bigger puzzle. So this is kind of a fun Linn-Mar matrix Tetris kind of a job the committee members had a chance to do. Each kind of create their own, what they thought was the ideal format where projects could fit. And they came up with consensus for that as well. So I'll spend just a quick minute on this overview, but then the next few slides address this in a little more detail as well. You can probably see a little bit better. So I'll start with the high school footprint right here. Most people in this room are pretty aware of the high school campus that we're on, including this building. Give yourself a little bearing. This green rectangle right here is this actual building right now. Obviously you have the high school, the stadium, and then here's Excelsior to kind of give you a little context of the image that you're seeing. So the recommendations from this committee, looking back at the ideas that were on there, and we'll talk about next, parking was a big one. So all the yellow boxes are parking, additional parking to be added either here or in other locations. The repurposement of this building was a priority, so that's the green box, which we'll talk about in a minute. Tennis courts are currently right here, right out our back door. The group looked at out by Oak Ridge as a spot to create a little more space in this area and give tennis courts a better venue setup as well, which we'll talk about in a minute. So this image is all out by Oak Ridge. So there's Oak Ridge School, our high school and baseball and softball fields, and then the tennis courts could fit right in that area right there as a destination, hopefully a very nice complex. The other 2 items we have not talked much about yet, but we will in just a minute. The blue box right here, kind of the current Circle Drive off of 10th Street, looking at that as a performance venue, a larger auditorium for our district, for concerts, for performances, for presentations, whatever that may be, a larger. We've obviously outgrown our current auditorium. If you've been to anything in recent times, it's constantly overflow only. That is a space we'll talk about in a minute that's pretty tight along 10th Street. The architects feel confident we can make that fit in very nicely as well. The other rectangle we haven't talked about is off the back side of the high school. So here's our current gym, and on the back side there would be an indoor activity center. What that looks like yet still to be defined, but essentially a space to create additional places for PE classes during the school day, and then practice spaces before school and after school, especially in times like this in in spring when it feels like winter and we never able to get outside and do anything. We're extremely limited on opportunities there for our member of students too. And then the last piece I'll mention that I almost skipped over is one of the decisions from the committee that came up loud and clear was we need to get administration out of this location and create more space for high school potential future growth. So then it became a matter of where do we go? There's lots of options of where that could go. A lot of people like to tell us where they would like to see us go. But the committee consensus was out by Excelsior, we have property where the trees are right now. If you've been out there recently, you'll see there's actually a road being developed to give Excelsior a second access point, which we'll talk about in a minute. And this could also be a location for our administration building to be and get us out of this main area and rededicate this building or space to completely high school focus on the campus. So there's kind of the master plan and overview in general. I'll kind of walk through each of those pieces of the puzzle in a little more detail for you as well. So we've taken those projects and essentially put them into a couple different phases. And they're not hard line drawn after phase 1 or phase 2. There is definitely some overlap. But as far as planning purposes go and sequencing go, looking at phase 1 and phase 2. So phase 1, the high school north parking lot, which we'll get to right where the old softball fields used to be, the tennis courts, administrative building, and the performance venue auditorium would be kind of in phase 1. Phase 2 would overlap indoor activity center and this building, high school extension, repurposing of this building become part of phase 2, and then remaining parking on this campus after that, kind of round out phase 2 for that section. I'll walk through each of those a little bit more carefully. This document says the exact same information as this, just in more of a timeline sequence, but has the exact same information on there. Hard for you to see from here, but if you get on the website, that's a little bit easier to see if some people like it visually that direction too. Since it is so hard to see, I won't bother going into all of that. So each of those phase 1 projects. So if you're familiar with Linn-Mar, before our new softball fields were built, our old softball field sat right here. It is now just a grass field. Tower, this image is a little bit outdated because obviously Tower Terrace goes through here right now. So the recommendation, the plan is to put additional parking there. Architects think we get about 200 parking spots in there, which would be fabulous to have during school day, but also for activities and events in the evening. So that's phase 1, one of the first projects we think we can knock out relatively easy. Next one then is the tennis court. So this is showing, like I mentioned earlier, Oak Ridge is right over here. The current parking that's at Oak Ridge, baseball and softball fields, and then there's a grass field right here that's been used for football essentially, but now with the track that we have out there, a new football field, this space is an option for tennis courts. It doesn't mean this is exactly what it'll look like yet. This is just a schematic to make sure space-wise it would fit, and there'll be an opportunity there to be the right location for us. So we're looking at 8 tennis courts instead of the 6 current ones that we have right now. Also, this areas they're showing here are potential viewing areas for fans to watch, and as the high school kids compete, give them a little better viewing space than trying to peek through the current situation we have right now. Again, this may look a little bit different, but as a starting point, we know it does potentially work in that location. We're also planning to have some conversations with the city of Marion. Are there some potential partnerships for us to explore? Whether that means lights at the complex, is that pickleball is always a topic of interest from the city level. We've talked about additional parking options. We're just going to continue some conversations with the city. The Parks and Rec Director was on our Facility Advisory Committee, and he'd definitely like to continue some conversations there, so we're going to meet actually Thursday this week. So that's kind of the rough draft of what tennis courts could look like. Really feel like that's one of the facilities that is lagging behind for our students to be able to use as well. So first draft of tennis courts. Administration building. These two show the exact same thing. This was just a rough design of what it could look like. And then I wanted to include this picture because this shows Excelsior. And if you've driven out there recently, you start to see this road starting to take place. The plan is that that second access point to Excelsior will be open and ready to go for next school year, which anybody that has students at Excelsior knows that's a big deal because the one road in, one road out onto 10th Street is messy at best. So opportunity with that road being there, the administration building could be in this location and then tag into that road or connect with Winslow potentially as well. It does not necessarily have to go here yet. We've also talked it could go in the green space. The problem there is you lose green space for the middle school kids at Excelsior. So there's some trade-off. Keep the trees, keep the green space. So we're working with the engineers to get back some recommendations from them, what would work best from a facility access, utilities, those type of things as well. So that may change a little bit, but in general, we know there will be space there. I will address the elephant in the room on this one with the administration building. We will not be building what Cedar Rapids has as a Taj Mahal and their district. OPN is our architects. They build beautiful schools. We have several of them in our district right now, and I've already told them whatever we build for an administration building will not be beautiful schools like we have currently. It'll be a very functional, useful building for our administration building, but it will not be all the bells and whistles with everything. So I think it's important for us to have and be able to use it, be a useful space, but not a showpiece by any means. So that's our plan going forward for the administration building. The final piece of phase one, I mentioned the performance venue auditorium. Again, that big blue rectangle that's there. You can see it almost butts right up against the current high school, almost all the way up to 10th Street. And the plan right now is that it would connect to our current auditorium and entry space that we have there to make it a multiple use facility. I've had multiple things going on at the same time for access for different programs back and forth. There is some mechanical pieces in here that are extremely outdated and need to be replaced anyway. So at the same time that we would look to do this, we would look to replace the mechanical and build that in to this construction project as well. This piece you'll see or maybe noticed on some of our timeline pieces. This piece will take a while to get all the fine tuning from the architecture done. So right now we're essentially adding a second design phase for them to make sure before we get any farther in this process that what we want can actually all fit in that space in a functional, successful manner. So that will take a little while. That'll be, of all the projects we're looking at, that one is the most complex by far. So phase two then. So we flip from this side of the building to the back side of the building, looking at indoor activity centers I mentioned. It would connect with our current back hallway off of the weight room and gym access points there. Look at restroom facilities as part of that as well too. Just a multi-use space which could be used for essentially any activity group at that point. So looking for it to be very flexible use and very multiple in its purposes. And then the final two pieces of it, this one, the high school extension piece, this is where things get very gray. We're getting several years out, and what this building will look like is still very much yet to be defined. You'll see right now there's multiple green rectangles. Some other designs we had something around the corner here, or maybe the building could be here. We could even put this building, could be in this location and move parking that way. There's lots of ways this could look. One of them could be this building stays as is and we remodel it. So obviously that would just be this green rectangle here. Other options would be this building has served its purpose and it's time to build new, or it could even be a hybrid. Maybe we keep part of this building and add other portions to it. So the specifics of this building right now are still very gray as far as what that looks like. So you will see and hear many different things over the upcoming months as far as what this could be. One of the things we'll do is work with high school staff and staff there in this building to see what do we envision this to be. Do we want this to continue to be Compass and Venture like it currently is now? Is it Compass and Venture, but we also add other programs? Is it something totally different than that? That essentially right now all ideas are still very much on the table. But what we do know is we need additional high school space. This building can provide that, whether it's this older building being renovated or a newer facility as well. So So this one's a little bit farther down the planning, partially because this building can be reused in any way, shape, or form as soon as administration is out of here and they're expanded to be used while the final decisions are being made there. So that one just have to be patient with. We've got several staff in this building I know are here curious what that looks like for them, and we are too, but that'll be part of the fun decision-making process. And then the last piece of the puzzle, I already talked about this parking area here. Once we make some decisions on this location, the plan is to fill in parking around the other spaces to add as much parking on this campus area as we possibly can. So again, if this LRC essentially becomes over here, then the parking will go this direction. There's all kinds of possibilities with that. So we don't have any timeline established for parking yet. We just know that needs to be part of the plan when we get to that point. So there's all the phases of things we've talked about, but as we're doing that, we also still know a couple other things always need to be on our radar as well. Everything we talked about there, none of that addresses elementary. And right now with our 7 elementaries, we're in a pretty good spot space-wise, as I mentioned, but based on developments and growth in the community, we know we need to keep an eye on that as well. We have several pieces of land we own throughout the district. Most of them for elementary-wise are more on the east side of the district as far as the size of the land location. So one thing we talked about is, do we need another piece of land on the west side of the district someplace as a potential location for a future elementary somewhere down the road. And then the question becomes additional elementary school. When does that happen and where does that happen? Is it on the east side? Is it on the west side? Is it both sides? That is still very much on the radar to be determined as well. So those are the pieces that are still lingering out there, we know, but they're a little more isolated pieces than they are interconnected pieces like we just talked about with the high school footprint. So costs, that's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of projects. Nothing comes cheap, and it's not getting any cheaper, we fully realize. So the cost of these projects, I won't go through each of them right here. You can see them, and again, these costs are very rough estimates. We'll get more fine-tuned costs on each of these as we get farther into the project, but we had to have something as a starting point. So OPN Architects worked with JT Anderson, our CFO, to put together what we estimate those costs will be based on square footage of buildings, potential uses, and then estimated costs as well. With inflation the way it is now, who knows what that'll look like as the time comes, but we've tried to estimate very, very conservatively with our costs with everything. Bottom line of all those costs will be between $48 and $60 million. So massive dollar amount that we're talking about, but also just to give you a little perspective, the 2 intermediate buildings, when they were built in 2018, I think we ended up at $65 million was the total cost for those 2 schools. So all of these things, at least as of now, look to be less than those 2 projects were overall, just to give you a little bit of a reference point. The other piece I want to touch base on school finance, because this gets confusing, but it's really, really important for us, is as we look at all of our projects, by law in the state of Iowa, we have certain buckets of money that we get allocated and that we have to spend certain funds out of. So for example, I'll just pick the physical plant and equipment levy fund because I would talk about that one first. Anything that goes into that fund comes from our property taxes, has to go into essentially what the name says, our physical plant or our equipment essentially. So the flyer you have in front of you, you'll see projects listed with PEPL. That's what's referencing, that's what the funds in PEPL have been used for in the past. The first project on our list, the north parking lot, I believe we have scheduled to pay for out of PEPL dollars. So that's where those funds would come from. So we can only spend PEPL dollars on those type of projects. We can't spend those on salaries. We can't spend those on curriculum materials. We have to, it's very clear in how we do that. So the funds that are here, general fund is typically where our general expenses come from, curriculum materials, teacher salaries, those type of expenses are there. I won't go into all the other ones, but the 3 I've starred here are where we would look at paying for these projects. So for example, PEPL I just mentioned. Pearl Fund is a small fund that goes towards essentially recreational type facilities. If you've been out to Oak Ridge, we did a joint project with the city. We built a football field and track out there for our students, and it's also a community track use as well. Our portion of that partnership project was paid for out of Pearl funds. We're also looking at the tennis court project will be paid for partially out of Pearl funds as well. And then the third one I highlighted and starred here is the biggest project fund that we have, the 1-cent sales tax in Iowa, or SAVE fund. We are planning right now to use the remaining funds that we don't have enough in Pearl to cover the tennis courts, so the remaining dollar amount will come from what we have already in our SAVE account to pay for the tennis courts already. All of our future projects that are listed on there are budgeted to come out of our SAVE 1-cent sales tax future earnings. So whether we bond against those and get money ahead of time, or based on how we schedule things out, as those dollars come in, we can pay for it as we go. The other one I did not highlight, but I probably should have, is debt services fund. What that is when we pass a bond issue or something like that, then those funds is where that would come from. As you notice, we are not highlighting that. We are not planning to have a bond issue to pay for any of this. We are not planning to raise taxes to pay for any of this. So that is something we're very confident that we can be able to do and manage, and that's why this type of project will not have to go forward with a bond issue impact. So the tax rate screen I showed you earlier with the went up to 1801 and dropped back down again, none of this will impact those dollars being able to go forward as far as having to have a bond issue to raise that back up again. So we're very fortunate in Iowa. The 1-cent sales tax gives us a tremendous tool to be able to pay for resources without having to go to bond issues, and to be able to pay for without raising property taxes. So I think that's just an important one to really hit home for everybody too, because that's a lot of money. So there are funds. Questions, I ran through that really. There's a lot of stuff in there that we've been pondering over for months. And there's a lot of things we know, but there's also, as you can see, a lot of things we don't know yet. And that's okay. That's just part of the next phase of the process as we go through. Becomes really important. What I didn't put up here, and as I'm thinking of, I want to make sure to educate people on as well, our next steps that you will start to see. I will go back to this document. You will start to see work at the high school north parking lot, tennis courts, and the administration building as far as planning phases. You won't see construction for those start for a while. We have to go out, get our design pieces figured out for those, send those out to bid. So those things we're looking at more of next summer and into the following school year after that. So it'll be a little while before you actually see physical things start to take place, but this is the time where the work behind the scenes starts to happen. So what will happen now is we will have a core committee of a small group of people to really coordinate with our architects, because this is a little bit different than our last bond issue where we were building 2 identical schools, but that's all we were doing. Now we have people from a lot of different walks of life that need to have a voice in this process. For example, high school, you'll see a theme here. Obviously, high school administration will be part of that, those conversations, but we'll also be involving tennis coaches, ADs, on the conversation about tennis. What does that look like? We talk about performance venue. We'll be pulling in people from the music, band, orchestra, high school group to really focus on that piece as well, to get their input on what that design piece looks like. And then same thing for the administration building, the people that live and work in this building administratively, our staff here, they'll have some chances to give feedback as well. So we'll have a core group to work with everybody, and then as we go through the process, we will pull in individuals or teams to help provide some feedback to help design those buildings. And that'll be the fun part of the process. It's a chance to go explore, see what other schools or places are doing. There's some good ideas we can steal from them, legally steal from them, and then what can we design that fits for our needs here at Linn-Mar as well. So that's kind of our next steps. So we're trying to be as transparent as possible of how these funds are being used. It's a little bit different than the normal bond issue, so we want to be really clear about that portion. And then it will take a little while before you start seeing some action take place. But I think starting next summer, you'll start to see things actually in the groundwork actually start to happen. Sure. Yes and no. So in case you didn't hear a question, when the tennis courts are built at Oak Ridge, the new ones, will the tennis courts here and the tennis courts at Oak Ridge be demolished? The tennis courts here we do not see as being long-term options. We see that either being location for high school extension of the building or additional parking, not tennis. At Oak Ridge though, those tennis courts will stay. Opportunities for middle school in case there's overlap of middle school and high school, or if we have a high school larger event, we can have Well, that'd be 14 tennis courts being used at the same time as well. So, good. Good. Anybody?
I'm just wondering about the number of tennis courts. We're getting rid of 6 out here.
Correct. Yep.
Adding 2 at Oak Ridge, and there's already seems to be a scheduling issue with practices with the number of kids playing tennis. Is there any room for possibly having more out at Oak Ridge, or doing something more with the courts out at Excelsior?
It's a good question. We have talked a little bit about that, but not a lot. So that's something we'll have to spend a little more time with. The advantage of what we're looking at here, let me go back to this other visual. At Oak Ridge right now, the tennis courts we're talking about are here. There's also 6 tennis courts here. People aren't aware of that. So with our school schedules, when Oak Ridge Middle School day is done and tennis practice is done, high school could potentially use these 8 plus those 6. So they would have 14 available on the same campus. So it's a way to double our tennis courts available on the location without actually building a full new double batch, if that makes sense. So yeah, because right now we have to stagger girls first or boys and then back and forth on this property, but if we can move them all to Oak Ridge, we can do both at the same time, just on both locations.
Some issue with transporting freshmen, we'll have these freshmen who are going to drive, get it.
Yep.
Maybe some sophomores getting to practice location.
Yep. That's the same thing we have with baseball and softball out there right now as well. So yep, we do make sure transportation is provided for those that need it as well.
If you do a project with the city on the tennis courts, they will be able to be designated as company fields and will have to be accessible to the public, correct?
It depends how we write that agreement, because like right now with the football field that was done right here, we have an agreement as far as when Oak Ridge has track or football things scheduled, those are our scheduled times, and the city goes around that piece of it as well. So it depends what agreement we put together in that plan. I can't see us giving up the availability of our fields when we need them, or tennis courts in this situation when we need them.
Right, and you're talking about having pickleball on there, and so then like on weekends or in the summer, they would need to be accessible to the public, I would assume, just like that is out at, Oak Ridge. So, like, I guess that's my question, like how are you gonna have people playing pickleball on there when our students are doing it, and then it's deteriorating the court, so is the idea to designate the ones closer to the baseball fields and allow our baseball fields as the actual varsity courts and not have those have public access? Like, anytime that you're gonna work with the city, you're gonna have to make sure that you have that.
Correct. Yeah, and I probably shouldn't even mention pickleball because that may not be what our agreement comes up with. But it's a hypothetical. Yep, it's a thing we've had conversation with over the years as well. It could very simply be we would allow pickleball on these courts but not on these courts, or those are the conversations we'll have to have. These would be the ones we would certainly be protecting more than anything else as far as we want to make sure it's at the level for our varsity athletes to have to be able to host larger events and
That are there already for this baseball softball complex within that fenced-in area.
can you say that again?
I'm just trying to understand why the city of Marion would help us with this project that's fenced in, mostly only accessible to our students, and, like, I'm not a taxpayer in Marion, so if Marion wants to use
Yeah.
taxpayer dollars to let it go off, I guess, but if I don't have access to it as a taxpayer, why would my taxpayer dollars go towards working on this project with Linn-Mar if the general public is not gonna have access?
And they may not. Our conversation may be not go very far. So we'll see where that goes. I know they have some level of interest. I don't know what level yet, but I know they have an interest at least discussing more. And it may be interest in lights or an interest in because right now, and if you've been out here for baseball, softball, for youth sports, they take over the Oak Ridge parking area and beyond on some of their weekends as well. So that's been conversations we've had with them as well. We're glad to be a partner on parking here, but we kind of need some reciprocity on that as well. So is that something we can get some assistance with? Maybe it's with parking. I don't know. We're still at that brainstorming stage and trying to figure out what do we do that works for both entities involved. So. Yep.
Maybe it's on here and it's not seeing it, but do you know the date, or when did we build the current park?
I don't know that. 99, 2000, somewhere in that range. Okay.
Would anything happen to a little theater, or would it still be there? Would it
Yep, as of right now, we're not planning to do any destruction to the little theater. As we get farther in that process, if there's a different repurposement to it, that could come up, but that's not part of the initial driving force to it.
I thought of an art center, like I've been in several districts where they had it somewhere that was neutral. Does that make sense? I just didn't know if you guys saw that.
By neutral, what do you mean by that?
It wasn't attached to any school, so like, that it was neutral, meaning like elementary, middle school,
Yep.
high school, so it was like a very, right, it was just a fine arts center, and then they rented it out to dance people, and the elementary would schedule, and they had someone running it, who was over help fine arts centers that had, and so I just didn't know if that was something that we thought about, or.
Yeah, we did discuss that at the committee level as well. We've talked about that, the pros and cons of having it attached to the high school versus having it be a separate building, and there are advantages to each. We thought the advantages of having it be connected are pretty valuable as far as being able to move the materials back and forth, students back and forth easier in that piece as well. I certainly don't see it being just a high school only facility, whether it is when the auditorium is end up here, now this frees up hopefully our current auditorium opportunities for middle schools, intermediate buildings, elementaries to come over for more of their performances as well, whether it's this one, that one, or the little theater. There would be multiple options that would free up things so it's not just a high school only facility. And that wouldn't matter if it's attached or not attached for us, so. Yeah. Good. Yes?
So, how many seats are we gonna gain in this new auditorium compared to the old?
Yeah, we're still finalizing that piece as far as how much they can fit in that space. High school people help me out here. I think it's about 780 to 800, somewhere in there right now in our current auditorium. I should have asked the prom person, I should have known. So, thank you.
So what are we estimating?
So we're estimating the new one will be about 1,100 to 1,200, and maybe a little more than that even. So, about a 50% increase in the size of the facility. Kara?
I have a couple of questions, so I apologize in advance. My first question is, we have a student threshold that when a high school gets to a certain population, we start talking about the need for a second high school. The more we continue to make Linn-Mar High School better fit its students with these kind of additional facilities, to me, the more it seems like it's going to be even longer before we can build a second equitable high school. And so I do have some concerns that while we do need these facilities for our students, that this is gonna push that need even further down the road, and we're going to be trying to accommodate even more students in this high school, because then we're gonna have even more staff and even more facilities in our second high school. And so, that was one of the questions, is how can we look at that forward in the future, thinking with through the lens of equity between what we assume is inequitable, which may be like 10 years from now. And then, as we continue to, and I understand you explained the funding buckets, but as we continue to face underfunding in the general fund, what I guess the district's marketing plan is to get the public on board, because while all of us in the room understand that it's not great on property taxes and where different funding buckets work, because we deal with our staff through JP school, we are listening to here now, it doesn't matter. We're still gonna be building these grand facilities and saying we can't afford to hire teachers, so we're having to cut costs. And so I think we also should be cognizant of the optics of this. And then lastly, I don't know if you can speak to, are we already bonded out on the 1 cent sales tax? in
No.
the future?
Are we bonded out? Yes. Are we bonded out for a capacity? No, we are not.
Okay.
So we have,
Do you feel like this would take us to our bonding capacity for the sales tax?
no, unless, the cost that we have estimated right now, it will not max out our bonding capacity. So we are in a good spot there. The key was, I can't remember how many years ago it was, you probably remember more than I do, Kara, when the legislature extended the bonding ability past 2029 to 2049 or 2051, I forget which it is, that left us a lot more flexibility for that piece. Then we work with a group of financial gurus in that area, and they're very comfortable where we're at, even if all these go forward at the exact costs we have there. We still have some leeway, assuming all the projections of sales tax growth continues on the same trajectory that's anticipated as well. So, let me try to take your other questions. And the communication piece, if I forget one here, help me. The communication piece is, I completely agree, it's critical because people need to understand how we're paying for this, what is happening with that. So this is kind of the first step that we envision as we've progressed through this process, whether it's do something like this or more social media information or more updated our flyers or other information pieces, just to be as continual and regular that as we possibly can so people understand not only what's happening but how are we paying for it. Will just be an ongoing process because this is going to be a lengthy duration for all this to continue until completion for sure. And then your first question, I'm drawing a blank on now, help me out.
How we continue on the trajectory.
Oh, thank you. How did I forget that big question? So I should probably started with that today. Honestly, when I was talking historically, one of the things that the board did several years ago is we reconfirmed the target number for the high school is at 2,800 students before we are at capacity. That's counting the capacity of this building as part of that capacity. So right now we are about 2,200. So 2,800, obviously the basic math would be 700 kids per grade at all 4 grade levels of the high school. We don't have 700 kids at any grade in our high school or in our district right now. So in our projections, we feel very confident that 10 years out, at least we will not need another high school, and even beyond that with those numbers, unless our numbers really grow pretty consistently across the board for us right now. So I'll take your other part of your question of if we keep building to this new high school, or our current high school, is that going to create an equity issue? Honestly, whenever we do build another high school, whenever that time comes, whatever that looks like, I'm pretty optimistic that new building is going to be more of the marquee, beautiful building that people are going to want to go to, not the old current high school, even with renovations and updates, just from watching what's happened in other school districts as well. So I think if anything, this just helps us get to that point that when that time comes to decide another high school, our current one will at least be somewhat at a level of appeal to people, so it won't be the old building and the new building, and that equity piece there becomes really important, I think. If I felt like in the next 5 to 7 years we were looking at a high school, yeah, some of these things would be a little more of a conversation of is that worth the investment in it right now. But with the numbers we're seeing of 2,800 space-wise, 700 kids per grade level, we're just not approaching that at any grade right now, much less 4 of them back to back. So there's a kind of a long answer to that complicated question. But that did help drive the initial decision from the board of staying at 2,800 as a capacity, help drive, well, okay, knowing that is the big priority, what other pieces can we start to plan for in the meantime then?
My last question was with the addition of the indoor, like your red indoor athletic facility, like another room or whatever it's going to be, is that come with a commitment to having young girls as high school?
See Tanya back there nodding her head even before you finished your question, so absolutely. We would like to start a more enhanced, expanded intramural program right now. We just don't have the facilities on a consistent basis available to be able to do that. So yep, that would be a huge benefit of being able to do that. Other questions? All right, 12:45. I will be glad to stick around. If somebody has a question you'd rather ask me individually, board members, I'm not sure what your schedule's like, if they're available to ask questions about it as well. But I know some people are more comfortable asking in person and some would rather have you more in private, and either way is fine. Appreciate everybody coming today. Honestly, appreciate your feedback. Got some interesting thoughts on things to think about as we go forward. We don't have all the answers yet right now, but I feel like each step of the way we'll get a little more fine-tuned answers. We look forward to coming back and keeping you updated where those answers will fall. So appreciate you coming today. Help yourself. If you did not grab a flyer or other information, if you're interested, please do so.